Live from the Talking Joe studios, it's Talking Joe.
Talking Joe is on the air.
Hey, it's me, Mark, and welcome to Talking Joe, the G.I. Joe Comics podcast. Now, today is a very special episode as we will be talking to a British comics legend, Gerry Finley-Day, about his work on Battle Action Foirce, and we will be joined by noted author Brian Hickey, curator of the Treasury books reprinting the Battle Action Foirce comics. So without further ado, let's welcome them both. Welcome, Gerry. Welcome, Brian.
Okay. Nice to meet you both. Hiya.
Hey, Mark. Hey, Gerry.
So it's great to have you on, Gerry. For those who are of our audience who are less familiar with you, and we do get a lot of Americans watching who won't have had the benefit of growing up reading British comics, I'll give a little bit of a blurb. So Gerry Finley-Day, British comics legend, was born in 1947 in Dundee. He is a former paratrooper, a writer of comics and books, very prolific in the 60s through to the 80s, best known as the creator of Rogue Trooper. Drafted by Pat Mills to develop characters for Battle Picture Weekly, he wrote strips including Rat Pack, The Sarge, D-Day Dawson, and most importantly for us, Action Foirce. You were also one of the mainstays of early 2000 AD, writing Invasion, Dundee, Fiends of the Eastern Front, but most significantly, Rogue Trooper. Over my shoulder there, the creator and running on for many years. I think that was introduced in 1981, a couple of years before Action Foirce was launched.
That's right. Yeah.
Wow, that is some career right there.
Phew! What a career! And I was saying for the likes of me and Brian, who sort of grew up immersed in British comics. Strips like Rogue Trooper and those battle strips were such a huge part of our childhood, sort of looking forward to that comic dropping on our doorstep through the letterbox delivered by the local newsagent. Real highlight of the week. Gerry, before we get too deep into all things Action Foirce, maybe we can talk about your background. So what was where did you grow up, and what was your kind of roots into comics?
Well, growing up was originally Brodie Ferry, which is this port next to Dundee, Edinburgh, and then Ayrshire. As I said, I'd put a little thing in this first book of the trilogy showing a bit of background, which was that I grew up in Ayr. We were next to Prestwick Airport, which was, as I say in the book, it was the only place in England where Elvis apparently landed. But it was also the biggest Air Force base, American Air Force base at the time in Britain. So you had tons of American comics, American stuff pouring in all the time. I don't really know how this went across the whole of Britain, but as far as we were concerned, we were very used to American comics, 10-cent comics, Sergeant Rock, all these Stag. There was all these magazines that were pouring in that were in fact so much more interesting than the British ones. There wasn't much that was coming that way. So this was we would swap them in the playgrounds. There was a big following amongst my pals as to American literature, as it were. So there was that. Then there was a hiatus, and there was suddenly somebody clicked in IPC, and you suddenly had British versions of that appearing with War Picture Library, Battle Picture Library, and Commando, which of course is still on the go. So I originally wanted to be an artist, and then I'm a comic strip artist, and then I realized it probably wasn't that good enough. So I switched to the writing side of things. Went up and saw this guy, Ted Bedsburg, who was in charge of War Picture Library at the time, who said, look, if you want to try it, try your luck. Here's a script, here's the finished product, see what you can do. So having taken it all apart, literally, the whole script apart to see how it went, that's how that got me going. So I started off with a couple of stories in Battle Picture Library, then Commando, and went on from there.
And did you kind of, for that initial experience, was it like reverse engineering? It's like, here's a script and the comic that it created.
Sure, it's like, yeah.
Figure it out and replicate that kind of same thing.
Yeah, very much like that. Yeah.
And it's interesting you growing up near the US air base and getting access to all of those American comics, and particularly the war comics, because in my mind it was like the war comics was such a British institution. We had that during the 80s. We had all of Valiant and Victor and Battle and Commando and Battle and all of these comics. So it's, in my mind, it's like such a British thing. But for you, it was almost the American comics that came first. And I guess those amazing Joe Kubert, Sergeant Rock comics and that kind of thing.
Yeah, no, they were way ahead. They were way ahead, just like most of the media. Color TV shows, that sort of format. They were ahead. So as I say, it's a good. It wasn't until about the late 50s that they began to get going with British war comics as you would understand them. Prior to that, there was Eagle. There wasn't much of a thing going on.
Do you think those American comics had a big influence in terms of how you approached
definitely
writing comics?
Yeah. Again, it was mirrored with films as well. American films, there were war films coming out by the ton, whereas British ones were a bit more, what would you call it, reserved. The Cruel Sea, things like that. So the Americans actually were pushing the momentum. Somebody in Britain, I think somebody like Ted Bensberg, excuse me, had picked up on that. So you had some very, very well written stories.
I get the sense that you also that cinema was a big influence in terms of how you approached your work as well.
Oh yeah. Ayr had 6, 7 cinemas. It was a seaside town. It was Glasgow on Sea, which meant every summer the whole of Glasgow would come, just like London would come to Brighton or Margate, where I am now. So as a result, you had all these cinemas that kept going, and because it was actually the 50s, that was your oasis. Why should I mention the word oasis? You went to the cinema. That was your big thing. There was nothing at home, nothing on TV really to shout about. It was all black and white anyway. So this was your big wonder palace when you went in to see a Technicolor film, especially a big epic screening of something. But it was usually American, as I say. In fact, most of the British good films in those days tended to have an American actor, an American lead to help sales and so on. Victor Mature and I can't think of all, Alan Ladd, all these guys that came over here. Incidentally, I was doing a thesis on the Bond films, and that was how it all started. Warwick Films is Alan Ladd comes over, brings Richard Meyerbaum with him, who's the Bond writer, and they sort of Americanize British films.
Interesting. Yeah, you think of Bond as being a British institution, but there's a lot of Americanization in there.
It was all Americanized. I mean, the color work, the guys themselves were American, weren't they? Most of them. Broccoli. So there was, I mean, they polished it to perfection. But as I say, if you look at the background to those, they were all British American war films like the Red Berry, Cockleshell Heroes. Incidentally, it's weird. Have you heard? Do you remember Cockleshell Heroes, the film?
Not one that I've seen.
Brian, do you not know about the canoeists that go up to some ports? They canoe up to some port in France and they blow it all up. It's a true story.
I'm not familiar with it, but I really want to see it now.
Anyway, Cockleshell Heroes was done by all the Bond people, all the Bond guys, if you like. I'm talking about films now rather than comics for a second. All these guys had done their sort of apprenticeship in war films like the Red Berry, Cockleshell Heroes and so on, which really meant that the original Bond films, which the classic ones, were all really war films. They were a guy on a mission somewhere and lots of action, which you'd never had before. So coming back to what I've said, this is where I am right now, just next to Margate. It's the beach, the actual beach where the guys took off on their canoes on a dummy run up the Thames to try and recreate what's going to happen in France. It's just weird. It's right beside you. But coming back to what I'm saying, you know, we're coming to British comics, as it were, picking up on films, as it were. I'm sure there was an awareness there all the time. So again, you had the British comics took off, but it wasn't until what are we talking about? 59, 60. We're talking about War Picture Library, Battle Commando comes out then. It's not until the 70s where you really get going, which was, of course, was DC Thompson's with Warlord coming out first.
My older cousins, they read Warlord. So when I would visit their homes in the 70s,
Yeah.
there was always a copy of Warlord lying around. But it was probably when Battle came on the scene then, maybe a couple of years later, and this is still in the 70s, and they kind of migrated over to Battle.
Yeah.
And I certainly noticed that there was a change in the tone in the stories in Battle. It was much more, it was darker and more violent than typically what you would have seen in Warlord.
Yeah, that's right. Again, this was Pat Mills and John Wagner. We'd all grounded also in girl stories. In fact, Romeo as well John had been on. So there was a feeling of story was important, that plotting was important. And also, I think we're able to afford very good artists. You know, we paid always better than Thompson's, so you could get a lot of talent in. So as a result, we got some very good guys like Esquerra and British guys like Jeff Campion. So we had a good start. And I think, as I said, at Billy Skillen, I think they were given a fright, Thompson's, because they dominated so much with all the sales. They were the best. Jackie, nobody could compete with Jackie. Bunty, we tried that with Tammy to some degree. The stuff that they had, the People's Friend, all these magazines, all these journals that went on and on and on. The Beano, the Dandy, you know, they just had it right, and there was always a sort of, if you like, an attempt to sort of better that, or certainly match it.
And a surprising part of this history of Battle is its kind of emergence from the girls' comic stable, and a lot of the creators having worked on these girls' comics.
Yeah.
Did it seem like a kind of radical step, moving from writing a girls' comic to writing a war comic? Was it a lot more exciting, or was it just a different kind of job?
I'll tell you, it's really back to front here, because I'd started off on Action Comics,
right?
And when I joined IBC, they thought I was suited for the girls' side, which I knew nothing about. Because the brief was, you know, try and beat Bunty. There was about 3 different titles, if I remember right. Mandy. There was 2 or 3 other ones. I really can't remember them, but there was the good 3 leading ones that the ones down in London here with IBC couldn't match. So I was put into that, and then having gleaned an awful lot of that, I started on the girls' side, and I appreciated plotting, because, you know, you didn't get away with action. You couldn't do action. You know, you could spend a whole page of action, just guys slugging it out with each other, which you couldn't do with a girls' comic. It had to be far more subtle, far more Jane Austen, if you like. So I learned that. And then suddenly it was flipped over when they said, "Look, can you help out? Can you go in with John and Pat on this new battle idea?" And then it was the same thing, because I don't think they'd had experience on the boys' side of things. No, I don't think they did.
I think we missed out a key part of your story as well, though. In terms of your bio, I see that you're described as a paratrooper. So where does this fit into your career? When did you do that? How long did that last for?
No, when did I sort of went in by accident, really. Palomine was in. Come along to the gym. You're fit, aren't you? Yeah, I play rugby, all this stuff. Was I fit? Heck. I lasted about 20 minutes. I was really angry with that. And then I thought, right, I've got to try this. So it was a sort of rite of passage, as it were. You'll find an awful lot of Scots guys and Irish guys do the same thing. As a Celt thing as well, for some reason. There were so many of them I met. Wanted to do this to prove it. And really, you know, went into it, got my wings. Other things happened. It didn't stay there that long. And then suddenly fact, not long after the writing started, in fact, part of it was getting a good grip on the accuracy, on the authenticity of the forces before I began to write about them, as it were.
So it was a good experience to draw on in terms of the authenticity of.
Yeah.
That's actually so. I mean, recapping that there, you've got that kind of grounding in kind of good storytelling and plotting from the girls' comic side of things. That sort of sense of authenticity from actual, being in the military, bringing all of that together. And when we look at, at Battle comic, what you created there, with Pat and John, I'm thinking, and I'm particularly thinking of the Sarge, which is one of my favorite, battle strips. It's a Band of Brothers story, but decades before we had the hit TV show Band of Brothers, and that for me was a real. I was a history buff in school, so I loved it felt like I was reading a true story of how a squad worked their way up from North Africa and all the way up through Italy. It was almost like a history lesson for me about World War II, and I'm pretty sure some of what I read in that strip probably made its way into answers to history questions in class as well. So,
yeah, for sure. In fact, going back to the American comics of the 50s, Sergeant Rock was very much an example, which was really a John Wayne character. All his stories. What was clever about it was. There was no time factor. Each episode could have been anywhere. It was in Africa one day, it was in Germany the next day, and there was no filling of a timeline there. So it just dropped you into a particular situation. There wasn't really much historical background. They kept that very quiet. But that was my sort of linchpin there. Also, our favorite American TV series in the 50s was a thing called Boots and Saddles, which, as somebody picked up on, was created by Gene Roddenberry, the Star Trek guy.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
Now, this was very much a gritty, what we liked about it. There was no good looking, and there was no women in it at the time, which we thought was great. But it was a very hard boiled GI type Western where they were all a cavalry troop, all very much veteran, what you call character actors, which was, the idea of the sort of ugly team, as it were. So it was very, very. That was our favorite. That was a thing we all talked about in air. That was our Western, sort of our favorite Western, as it were. So from that, the Sarge, Rat Pack, I suppose. Some of the other ones. Look at Darky's Mob was another very example of John's. The same idea of the team.
And running parallel to a lot of these war strips in Battle and just prior to Action Foirce was the creation of Rogue Trooper.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
There he is in his first appearance in 1981.
Yeah.
And there's a nice bit of synchronicity to this podcast in terms of being G.I. Joe focused. In terms of the name of Rogue Trooper, I think was option B, that you previously had another idea of his name in mind.
Yeah, as I said to you, I like G.I. Joe, which we wouldn't have been allowed. They'd have jumped on us. Mattel, was it Mattel, who were their the franchise?
Hasbro, that's right. They wouldn't have allowed it, but the idea at the time was the buzzword was genetically engineered, as opposed to they now use the word genetically enhanced, which is actually, it sounds like he's had Botox. So that was the idea. And then there was a couple of others, Trooper Tube, because he was going to be from a test tube. The whole idea was that he was a sort of deliberately created soldier. Really, that was it. We took it from there. Plus, I think, to give it its due, the old Lone Ranger story, which is the last of the Lone Rangers who survives an ambush. I hadn't really thought about that at the time, but I suppose I got to be aware of that now. But that was really it, the soldier moving off on his own. But again, he's got his team with him, which is his former buddies.
This is certainly, in my opinion, the greatest strip to come out of that kind of classic era of 2000 AD. And yet it has those echoes back to what you were talking about, Gerry. And certainly you can see echoes of the Sarge. And they're like, he's got his bio-chipped buddies into the gear. It's a small team. And there's a great kind of, I suppose, there's a linear approach to the storytelling, that they're just always moving one step further on their quest to get justice and to catch the traitor that sold them out.
Yeah, also, if you remember, D-Day Dawson in battle was carrying a chip of sorts. He had a bullet in him, remember?
That's correct, yep.
So that was a sort, if you like, a sort of chip, if in a very grim way. So he was always aware of that. I suppose something came through on that as well. But certainly it kept the team idea going.
But D-Day Dawson is a brilliant strip, and yeah, it's like he's this character that has like for readers who aren't maybe, or viewers who aren't as familiar, with the British comics, it's like he almost has a death wish. Yeah. Well, not that he knows that he's going to die for sure, and so he takes on the most outrageous kind of missions because he's got nothing to lose. Yeah. It's another super strip in battle.
Yeah.
I was going to say that while we're just on Rogue Trooper, just shortly before recording, there was a press release with some new images of the upcoming movie, directed by Duncan Jones. Gerry, are you excited to see these updates? Are you looking forward to seeing?
You're telling me I didn't know about them. How long ago was this? How recent was this?
This was, I guess, last week. Yeah, there was just a few stills.
Oh yeah, it's all very evolving. It's all very exciting. We just wait and see. The
synopsis that they included in the press release, it sounds like that it's very, very faithful, Gerry, to your original kind of Rogue Trooper story.
Mm-hmm.
And I think at Enniskillen, you mentioned that you had a chance to visit the Rogue Trooper set when it was in production.
That's right.
Oh.
Yeah, down in the old, I still can't remember the old power station where they turned it into a giant studio. But as I say, because you don't get the old cuts, lights, camera, action, it's all cut to bits and also reassembled in a far more infinitesimal way. I didn't catch much of the storyline. It was very, superb to watch. But as I say, it was all brand new stuff. You weren't sitting in front of a camera or a rolling dolly or anything like that. You were just watching bits and pieces being put together, almost like a archaeological dig. That it was all carefully being assembled.
Wow,
fantastic! So onto Action Foirce. Can you tell us about how the Action Foirce gig kind of landed with you? I think it was a call from editor Terry McGee. Is that right?
That's right. Terry just phoned me out of the blue. We had this talk, met up. I came into London, we met up, and then I got all these. I got the blurb, the franchise had put together all these toys. I had a lad of, how old did we there? 10. So there was a lot of toys to play with, plus all the blurb. A lot of people have put a lot of work into backgrounds. And you could take off from that. So a lot of it was laid on for you, and you just had to embellish it.
Did they give you like a giant box of the toys kind of?
Yes, yeah. I think they did. So this is very important actually to see exactly what the characters were going to be, because somebody put in a lot of work, and I never found out exactly who. But there was a lot of characterization that had been done for me. That was very helpful.
Okay. So someone had sort of like almost put together a bit of a story Bible or character Bible at that point.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Because actually, the Black Major was always a good one. There's nothing like a villain to whet the appetite.
Well, what I love about your Black Major story, and it's an epic, background story in the Black Major that you created, where it's the story of a bad person who becomes even more bad over the course of the story. So there's nothing redeeming about him whatsoever. And I thought now looking back on that was a brilliant twist on the bad guy story.
Yeah, I liked it. I mean, I think most actors, if you're good, like to be villains because you can get away with so much more. You know, in a Bond film, the villain is the one you know who plays up to everything. I can't think of who was the best villain in it. I suppose my favourite one is Robert Shaw,
Oh, yeah.
and of course the girl in it, Rosa Klebb. Yeah, that was a nice start. The Black Major. I relished writing about him.
With these characters, they they were the space team, the sea team, the
Right.
SAS, the army, and they as toys themselves, they are a bit of a blank slate. They're sort of like a color scheme and very similar looking. So
Exactly.
there was what was interesting about this era of storytelling for Action Foirce was how much personality was being injected into these characters that didn't really exist beyond
Exactly.
a 4-inch piece of plastic.
That's right. That's right. Yeah. Have you seen Barbie?
Sorry, Gerry?
I said, have you seen Barbie?
I have, yeah.
Barbie. Anyway, I digress.
Well, I love that when you talked about we were talking about how you would create teams within your stories, like within the Sarge or even within Rogue Trooper. And you see that carry over with your treatment of the SAS team, that you've got this kind of great relationship between, Eagle, who's the captain of the team, and then Stakeout, who's his kind of right-hand man. And they're almost always with Quickfire, the kind of their German counterpart. And that team dynamic that you use so successfully in your other strips really gets, it brings the Action Foirce characters to life. And it works really well in those stories.
Yeah. It's true. I mean, you were there, Brian, the other night when John and I sat there and we were talking about, he talked about Doctor Who and said he preferred Star Trek, which led me on to talk about Gene Roddenberry and Boots and Saddles. But Star Trek's a very good example of the team, the recognizable people that were always there, which is always, everybody latches onto that. Which is why going back to Rogue Trooper as well, you need these guys with you, almost like ghosts around you. And of course, with Action Foirce, you were able to do that because you were given allotted characters to play with, who'd already been sort of what would you call it, set in stone.
I know from conversations with Bob Breakin, who was one of the toy designers that worked on, well, he's the toy designer that brought Action Foirce to life, and he would say that the marketing department did put a lot of work in to kind of flesh out the universe. So I imagine it was that team at Palatoy presented IPC with, well, here's what we've got and what we want to see brought to life.
Yeah, I had just won the meet. We had one lunch with them, and I can't remember all the guys there. There's quite a lot of people. But I gathered that was the case. There was a lot of enthusiasm, just like I had for the characters, to sort of build them up so that they think when you buy your particular character, you sort of know that much more about them through the storylines, through the comics.
Was Terry McGee, was he the main point of contact that you had at IPC when you were working through these stories?
Yeah, Gil Page was in charge. I think he designated me, but I mean, I knew Terry from way back. When he'd freelanced, he'd gone to Spain. I also remember a joke. I was like, he used to phone me up about the scripts and reverse the charges. I remember saying that.
And how did you go about, because most of the first year or so was very much dominated by your stories, so you were kind of like the real kind of showrunner, architect of the Action Foirce world as it started out, even though there was a few other writers also writing stories. Did you have did you kind of just work week by week? What sort of interest now, or did you kind of lay out some sort of grand plan of the kind of stories that you wanted to tell over the months to come?
Yeah, it was almost like a rota. You had to go through you were more or less impressed into covering every single team there. So you go
Mhm.
from one to the other. You'd done your SAS one, you'd done your Black Major.
Right.
You had to go through, and then you come back on the conveyor belt, as it were, to do the next round, as it were, la ronde. So that was kept you on your toes, as it were. So you had to come up with freshness for the next saga for any particular team.
Yeah, so a big bit of the momentum is like, okay, I've got to spotlight this particular team or this character. What can I do with them?
Yeah.
Kind of thing.
Yeah.
And was there much back and forth with editorial and Palatoy? To what extent do they just let you get on with it?
Yeah, they let us get on with it. Essentially, I'd worked with Terry for a long time. He'd taken over Battle. Yeah, because Battle, of course, had undergone all sorts of changes. It had taken in all sorts of ones, Action, and I can't remember all the other ones. Hornet? No, not Hornet. I can't think what it was called now. I can't remember, but there was a number of other titles that it took in as they folded. So I'd known him for quite a while. As I say, for years by then. So it was very much an IPC thing. They left us to an awful lot of it. They trusted us, as it were.
And did you kind of have a routine as to how you'd approach writing a story? Would it be that you'd have a discipline of 9 to 5 sat in front of a typewriter at your desk, or was there, was there a kind of process that you followed?
Typewriters, that's a funny thing, you saying that. We got a typewriter from a charity shop the other day. Here's us sitting in front of all these screens now. But no, typewriting was the thing. On a sort of discipline, you tend to do a day's work, as it were, but you were still thinking of ideas all the way through. You scribble and scribble and scribble ideas as they came to you. I mean, I don't know how other writers, I'm just talking about myself, but you tend to try and do a day's work like a tradesman, as it were, but you're still thinking of other things way ahead. But again, you got family and so on, so you have other commitments. You can't just sit there like Charles Dickens or all these guys. You've got to be in the world, as it were.
A lot of your stories seem to be informed by a lot of research into the locations where they're set. So that research that must have been a big part of your process as well.
Oh yeah, there was a lot of. Again, we're talking about screens now. You could Google anything you want, but in those days, you had to. I spent a lot of time at the Imperial War Museum. In fact, there's still a superb library there where you get an awful lot of information. And the Imperial War Museum was 2 streets away from IPC, so it wasn't a big deal. You could just walk up there and get an appointment, and they were superb people. If you wanted something, they had a huge volume for you to play around with. So yeah, a lot of research, a lot of it. I mean, I still, for these books I'm doing, an awful lot of research, Googling and so on, and buying a lot of books as well.
You say a couple of streets away from IPC as well. So were you a regular visitor to IPC? Was it a case of just going there to touch base with editorial or hand in a script? Or
yeah, I got there at least once a week.
Oh wow!
More than that. In fact, when I went freelance, I had a space there anyway. I had a sort of office where I would sit there. And then I managed to get a little office at home in this village I lived in for, what was it? £1 a week, I think it was. A little. It was lovely. Funnily enough, I meant to say this, a few streets away from that, funnily enough, is where the pub landlord lived. I've forgotten his name now. What's his name?
What, the comedian Al Murray?
Al Murray, the guy who does the podcasts on war,
on history,
he's the war buff, isn't he? But he lived a few streets away. It's weird that I never met. And actually, I did see him when he was a lad. But actually, we were both in the same village. So as I say, I had this place, so I tended not to go up on a daily basis, which was expensive anyway, being a freelance guy. But I go up, as I say, to keep in at least once a week, almost at the same time.
Yeah, and remind the editor that you're still there, available for work.
And pick up your checks, make sure your checks were ready.
Right.
So as I say, it was an easy task just to wander up to the Imperial War Museum.
And I heard you describe your process for writing as a bit more like storyboarding. A little bit, maybe it sounded like it's a bit closer to the Marvel method almost, that you're doing a plot and then refining it once the art came in. Is that right?
This had started with the girl stuff, with Tammy, with John Purdy, that there was so much time wasted where you would have this almost like an ideal in your mind, and you'd go to these writers and say, can you do that? And they'd come back and say, that's not quite what I want. No, can you do that? Then after a while, you realize you were really getting up their nose because they were being asked again and again and again. So I remember somebody saying to somebody else, why don't you do it your effing self for the moment and show us? So that's what happened. So I thought, well, proof of the pudding, you got to do it yourself. So I started doing stories myself. I got into that so that it saved time. And then some of these ones you'd give over. You say, look, this is the first chapter. This is how it should be. Can you do that? And they'd pick up on that. So you'd give that away to them. So it's actually so many times we came up with the ideas, but actually put them down in first script form, and just actually handed it out. So when it came to Battle Picture Library, the same thing happened. There was all these ideas. Oh, we'll do this. We'll ask writers and so on, and writers again getting fed up and wasting time. Oh, sorry, that's not quite right. Can you do this? Can you do that? It's very easy to criticize. And of course, a lot of them got annoyed. And again, they were saying, well, you show us, you tell us, whatever you think. So with things like Rat Pack, D-Day Dawson, so I put down the first script as a sort of foundation for it.
Almost like you're writing the pilot.
Writing the pilot. And then as I say, it was a lovely time when the scripts came in, the finished artist products, who were usually, as I say, foreign guys, Spanish or Italian. It was a lovely day because one of our agents used to come in and just breeze in with them with like a Roman tribune with all these scrolls, and you'd undo it all, and it was all there. So what I'd realized when I'd spoken to these guys, I got to know quite a few of these Spanish fellas, they wouldn't bother with the dialogue so much because they weren't under pressure. They were clever enough. They spoke good English. They understood what was wanted. So they would more or less, I wouldn't say ignore the dialogue, but put that to one side and get the pictures right, which meant when you came back, you could play around with the dialogue as well by seeing the pictures. So it was storyboarding to that extent. And then you could add bits. That artist has done a fantastic bit there. Oh, I can add a bit of dialogue to that. So it was like almost cart before the horse.
So you almost had two passes at it. You had like the plot pass, you see the final art, and then you kind of do the dialogue pass over the top of it.
Like painting a car, and then you do the final coat. And as I say, with somebody like Scarra, I remember when his first Rat Pack came in, I thought, wow, look at that. That is superb. Again, when Scarra did the Fiends of the Eastern Front for 2000 AD, the same thing. How have you done that? That's amazing. That's almost how I wanted. How could you know that?
Yeah, and it does seem like you were blessed on a lot of these projects with an amazing array of artistic partners. That Dave Gibbons,
that's right,
Cam Kennedy, Scarra, outside of Action Foirce, but and on Action Foirce. You had sort of the Vanyu brothers doing this incredible work. I don't imagine that you ever got an opportunity to meet them if they were overseas.
Well, this is it. I met Jeff Campion, who I loved. I'd remembered him from the 60s, way back, writing comics for Lion, things like that. What was the other one? Lion, Tiger. So I knew them, but none of the other guys. I'd love to have met Scarra. This is a funny, I don't know, this is just a tiny story. In Rat Pack, do you remember the character called Dancer?
Yes.
Right. Paul Trimble phoned me up about this. What's this Dancer fella? Where does he come about? And I had him from a film. I picked him up from a film. an old French film where he was part of a gang, but he was the real psycho in the gang who looked exactly like Dancer, he looked like a bad Romeo, ballroom Romeo, but he was a killer with a knife.
Mm.
And, anyway.
Pencil moustache.
Yeah, that's right. A pencil moustache. So, as I said to Paul, he said, "Where did he come from?" I said, "Well, I saw this film, which was Borsellino, I think it was called, but it's a French film." And so I thought, not many people would have seen that film because French films didn't do well. And when Esquerra's stuff came in, his artwork came in, I thought, he's seen the film too.
Oh,
He probably had it in Spain. It was a French film. It was a continental film. Probably did, but I remember things like that, especially with Esquerra. But a lot of the good artists, you were given an extra boost. You think, oh, my goodness, they've really done me proud, as it were.
And in your introduction to this book, you talked about a glittering 1985 luncheon that you had with the toy maker Hasbro and also various people from...
I don't remember the guys. Jeff Campion was there. A few other artists. I can't remember. Cam Kennedy.
You mentioned John Cooper.
John Cooper was there. That's right. I think he was there. But he should have been. I'd have thought so, yeah. As I say, it's a while ago, but I can't remember the actual name of the company execs who were all there. But it was a nice lunch.
Well, speaking of like artistic talent that you got to work with, John Cooper is another great legend of the British comics. Who got to collaborate with you on a lot of Action Foirce strips. My personal favourite is the story that's set in the Highlands. It's called Operation Claymore, where the SAS team are on like a training mission, so they've only got blank ammunition, and that they're essentially being hunted by the Red Shadows across the Highlands. It's it really is a super story, and John's work, I think it's some of his best work on Action Foirce on that particular strip.
Yeah, yes, it was. Yeah, as I said, they usually did me proud when the stuff came back. It was always a nice feeling to see what have they done and be usually pleasantly surprised. Very, very rarely were you disappointed. Speaking
of like specific stories like Operation Claymore, how strong is like the memory of creating those stories all of these years on, and do you ever go back and reread them with the opportunity of these collections and that kind of thing?
Yeah, I have to be honest, some of them I think, did I write that? I remember who was it gave me a commando, he said, do you remember that one? I thought, I think so. But you see, I don't know how people found out. It wasn't until well into this era that you were given any credits. Not that I bothered about, wanting my name on the bottom, but that suddenly appeared, which meant if people wanted to, they could research pay slips and so on and find out who you were. But I thought, how did you know I wrote that in 1970? How do you know? Because I wasn't credited, but somebody obviously traced that. And there it was. Yes, and I thought, yes, I did write that.
Well, there'd be issues of Battle that I would be reading, and you would have written almost the entire comic, and pen names would have been dropped, had to be used across different stories, so that it didn't look like it was the one person writing the whole comic each week. Yeah.
But as I say, that was... I don't think the names didn't come out then. As I say, it was a few years on from that where you actually got credited, and I can't date it properly. Not that I was actually not that any of us. I don't think we were that bothered about seeing our names in print. It was just a business, a sort of a day of work, a job of work. You could tell me more than that, but as I say, if you look at the early battles and even Action, I don't think our names were listed then. And certainly with Commando, when that came out, and the War Pistol Library, you never had anybody's artist. You had to find out who the artist was when you wanted him. That wasn't advertised at all. It's all kept very, Buckeye English.
Yeah, fortunately for the readers of Action Foirce, by the time we were there in 1983, they had introduced credits, so we were able to see who the writers and illustrators were, even if the names were sometimes pen names. Yeah. But I think you were often credited as Gerry Day at that point. Maybe it was easier to fit in the credit box.
Yes. That's probably sounds better, doesn't it? Sounds like a DJ, Gerry Day. Yeah.
I believe it was Kevin O'Neill introduced the idea of credits for the artists in when he
Right. That's right.
in an
You're
editorial,
jogging me now. That's
and
yeah.
then that got rolled out then later for writers. I think it was Terry McGee then brought it on
Yeah.
for the whole the letterer, the writer, and the artist got credited then.
Yeah. And as you say, the letterer as well. So they should do. Yeah.
And the colorist never got credited in the British comics in that time period.
No.
So, and John Burns, I believe, was the colorist, did most of the battle, the coloring on Battle and Battle Action Force in the early to mid 80s.
Yeah. 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 You make me think now. Yeah.
On the Action Foirce stories, was there a particular set of characters or particular storyline that you can remember particularly enjoying?
Which was it? Well, the Scottish one was a sort of long distance one, wasn't it? There was a. Oh, I think what we did with the SAS ones, which was, I thought we can't just shoulder them into different countries, especially as they're all sovereign states. So the clever thing to do was to have them working alongside local special forces, so they weren't just. It wasn't just the British Empire back again.
Right. Makes sense.
And actually that's something that comes across really well in the lead story, Operation Bloodhound, and they visit or they operate in a whole series of countries in South America, and each time they're getting paired up with, it could be Chilean forces, it could be Ecuadorian Marines. Yeah. They go into a country that's not named, but we're led to believe that it's Argentina. Because they're being
that's right.
by the Argentinian cavalry across the Pampas grass.
Yeah, but I researched all that. I mean, I did a lot of research on these different forces. Ecuador ran the Galapagos Islands. I think they still do. And as you say, with the Argentinians, a lot of them still had cavalry, horsed cavalry, because of the size of it, because of their gaucho sort of traditions. So I did some research that.
So I've used up a lot of my questions already. Was there anything in the Action Foirce space that you wanted to ask about?
I think that's been brilliant. And in fact, I'm kind of looking forward to talking about Gerry's new book. So if you want to segue into that, Mark, this because everything that we've talked about, we can relate that back to Gerry's new novel.
Mm-hmm. So Gerry, sort of, you were sort of very well known in and prolific in the boys comic sort of space, sort of during up to the sort of the 80s, and then us comic readers have sort of seen slightly less of you. So what have you been doing with yourself in more recent years since you stopped at Battle in 2000 AD, and maybe you can bring us forward to the present?
Yeah, full length. Stories, a lot of ghosting as well, which again, we were doing credits. You don't credit much, and as I say, it was a long-term thing with this trilogy that came up, which a lot of the things fed into, especially because it's a wartime trilogy. Because again, I've done a lot of research as far as for a full-length book takes an awful lot too. So that's what I've been doing. So out of these things have come. There's as I say, the agents just left this very afternoon, and that's my focus at the moment.
So the Men from Morganland is available now as the first book of your
the second one, hopefully
trilogy.
Yeah, the second one, again, there's a bit of fiddling around with the publisher. This year, I would think before Christmas, certainly.
And you almost are you finished writing, and it's just a case of getting them out there?
Yeah, I've finished. Yeah, in fact, to tell you, I pushed on. What's the name for a second trilogy?
It's either a prequel or a sequel.
Sequel trilogy.
That's right. Yeah, so pushing on again. You go into an awful lot of detail. You find out all sorts of history. You think, hang on, I didn't know about that. This is the other thing. The more you think you know, you don't know. So by going, especially Googling and going up to the War Museum, which in fact still has other things that Google can't tell you, you find out all sorts of new possibilities, as it were, new locations.
I was actually really fortunate to get to read this book when I picked it up when it got released on Kindle format last year. And
Oh, yeah.
I have to say, it is an absolutely brilliant story. And I don't want to reveal any kind of spoilers, but it's a very, it's a kind of a great tense sort of, thriller, but there's also kind of a road trip element of it. And as I was reading it, I really felt I was kind of brought back in time, reading about these kind of, occupied countries, but, going back, whatever it is, 80 plus years. And and all the different cultures as they kind of travel down this kind of the eastern, the occupied Eastern Europe. It really is. It's your research kind of ethic that you brought to your comics. You see that coming into play here. Your characterizations, like we have our kind of like anti-hero with his kind of small team around him. It's again echoing some of that great work from your comics work as well, and plenty of action in there too. It's a great book, and I can't wait to get my hands on the next book when it comes out.
Okay, we'll send you a copy when we go.
Hey.
There we go. There's a promise. And what's the best place for people to get their hands on this? I know that you can get it on Amazon.
I would go to Amazon. Everything goes through Amazon now, doesn't it? Even when I'm finding old books, which I had to do, that are almost out of print, I go through Amazon, and there it is. You just browse through and see. Some of them have been quite expensive, but there's not a lot you can pick up. And a lot you can just pick up by sheer chance at a charity shop. It's weird, but as I say, I'm very keen on research anyway, getting facts right. There's nothing worse than reading something and finding you're thinking, no, that didn't happen, or that couldn't happen because of the logistics, etc. So in this case, with these books, I've gone to quite a bit of trouble. It's a shame, isn't it? How long ago is it? A couple of weeks that Frederick Forsyth, who was the master, has died. Who in turn, I think, was the closest to Ian Fleming as far as detail and a sort of, what do you call it? Confident storytelling.
Yeah.
Rich storytelling, I should say.
Well, I think you mentioned two great masters of kind of war thrillers and espionage thrillers. I think this book kind of sits comfortably in that kind of genre that both Ian Fleming and Frederick Forsyth, excelled in. And certainly, no, it is. It's a great book, and I think if anybody, if they're a fan of Gerry Finley-Day's comics, they're going to love this book. And it's up there on Amazon on Kindle. You can order the paperback edition either if people prefer the more physical book. It's well worth it.
Thanks.
There we go. There's a recommendation for sure. And Gerry, have you got any appearances coming up where people might be able to find you in the future?
There's something happening in the summer. I know, and you've got me. My wife's written it down in the diary. There'll be a couple of things. And again, we don't know. I'm waiting to hear a bit more about this film, if they want any more of a tie-in there, any more of an appearance. Was it back in May, wasn't it? I sat with Dave signing books for Rogue Trooper. But he hasn't, as I say, he hasn't been in touch. He doesn't know much more than me. So we'll wait and see if there's anything required there. But that's all I can think of. There's a couple of signings, but as I say, I can't specify. I wish I could tell you, but I can't. But it was a few years back. As I said, we went to Edinburgh. We went around the country with I can't remember what the actual book was that was being touted, but something's forthcoming, I think, this summer.
Brilliant.
Fantastic. And Brian, think it's a good opportunity to remind people that your fabulous books are still available. Do you want to do your stuff?
Well, I would say these are Gerry's fabulous books, and I was just very lucky to get a license to be allowed to reprint them. But if you're, for people who want to, discover the incredible storytelling of Gerry Finley-Day and some beautiful, amazing artwork as well, they can pick up the Battle Action Foirce Treasury editions at totaltoybooks.com. If you're based in Britain, Ireland, Europe, that's the best place to get them. But for our viewers here in North America, go to skeletron.com and you'll save a lot on the shipping buying directly from Skeletron's warehouse.
Right.
Fabulous. And there you are all together, Enniskillen, at your table with the books there as well. So I hope you got an opportunity to sign a few copies of those, Gerry.
Yeah, did, yeah.
I did, for sure. It was signing, well, those books and lots of other Gerry Finley-Day classics as well.
I'm left-handed, so love the signatures. Don't really look that. What we used to do in
I'm a writer. Do you expect me to be able to write?
in Scotland, they used to slap you if you used your left hand. Used to come along and catch you out and slap you across the back of the head. So I still duck sometimes when I do all these signings.
Fabulous. Thank you so much for spending time with us today, Gerry. It was great to talk with you and to discuss this marvelous period of British comics history.
Right, nice talking to you. I hope we meet. We hope we meet at some stage soon. Okay,
That'd be fabulous.
Gerry, thank you so much.